First, tears, then lies, and then a landfill 30 kilometers from home. They were looking for the child, but all the clues led to his own mother. She cried on camera, and then they filmed her in a bar, drinking a shot of tequila. At 9:39 a.m. on Wednesday, October 5, 2022, a 911 operator in Chatham County, Georgia, answered a call that was thick with panic. On the other end of the line was 28-year-old Daniel Youngkin. In the background, his 22-year-old girlfriend, Leilani Simon, could be heard, her voice a frantic counterpoint to his. "I can't find my son," Daniel stammered. "I can't find my boy." Their 20-month-old son, Quinton Simon, was gone. "I woke up and the front door is open and it's white and it's empty," Leilani cried out. She told the operator that the last time her son had been seen was the night before. Now, in the morning light, his pack-and-play was empty and the front door was ajar. To the terrified young couple, the only explanation was a chilling one: an abduction. "They kidnapped," Daniel told the operator, confirming the unthinkable. "I was released from a kidnap." The operator, attempting to get a clear picture amidst the chaos, asked for details. "How old is he?" she asked. The answer underscored the urgency. Quinton was just a baby. "He can't open the door," they insisted. The door had bolts, they explained, yet somehow it was open. They were adamant that there were no signs of a break-in, but the implication was clear. Someone had to have come inside and taken him. The first person Leilani called that morning wasn't 911. It was Daniel, who was already at work. He told his employer he had to leave immediately and rushed home to find Leilani hysterical on the front porch. He was stunned to learn she hadn't yet contacted the authorities. Assuming she had, given the severity of the situation, Daniel was the one who pulled out his phone and made the official report. As officers raced to the address on Buckhalter Road, Daniel tried to provide a description of his missing son. The description was jumbled, a reflection of the frantic state of the household. First, it was blue skin, blue eyes, and white skin. Then, tan skin, dark brown hair, and brown eyes. Finally, Daniel settled on a mix: black, white, Hispanic, and Hawaiian. Quinton was last seen wearing a light blue Sesame Street shirt and black pants. Within 2 minutes, police cars were pulling up to the home. The investigation began immediately, but from the very first moments, inconsistencies started to emerge. Leilani claimed she hadn't seen Quinton since everyone went to sleep the night before, but Daniel told a different story. He said he saw the 1-year-old in his playpen multiple times around 6 a.m. before he left for his warehouse job. According to their timeline, Leilani woke up about 3 hours later, found the door open, and realized the child was missing. Their theory, presented to the arriving officers, was that someone had silently walked through their unlocked front door and abducted the toddler while Leilani slept. The search for little Quinton Simon was underway, but the questions were already piling up. The house on Buckhalter Road was not a simple, quiet home. It was a pressure cooker of familial dysfunction, owned by Leilani's mother, Billie Jo Howell, and her husband, Thomas. Leilani and Daniel Youngkin lived there with Leilani's 3 young children, all from different fathers. They occupied a room downstairs, while upstairs lived Billie Jo, Thomas, and Leilani's older brother, Paul Simon. However, Billie Jo and Thomas were over-the-road workers, often gone for weeks at a time, leaving a volatile mix of personalities to fend for themselves. The environment was anything but stable. Just a month earlier, on September 8th, Billie Jo had filed papers to have Leilani and Daniel evicted from her home. The decision followed a heated argument between mother and daughter over laundry, and arguments so intense that law enforcement had been called, though no charges were filed. The household was tense, not a cohesive unit, but a collection of individuals barely coexisting. Leilani's life was on a downward spiral long before Quinton vanished. She had a history of drug use and a criminal record that included a recent conviction for felony larceny in North Carolina, which had left her on probation. Her mother claimed Leilani had a history of stealing money from her, presumably to buy drugs. This troubled history was the primary reason Leilani no longer had legal custody of her own children. In a move meant to protect the children, the courts had granted custody of Quinton to his grandmother, Billie Jo Howell. Yet despite being the legal non-parent custodian, Billie Jo's own past was checkered with charges for grand larceny, battery, prostitution, and fraud. It was a fragile safety net at best. And because they all lived under the same roof, Leilani's loss of custody was largely a formality. On a day-to-day basis, she was still very much in her son's life, a situation of de facto custody. The financial pressure was also mounting. On September 26th, just 9 days before Quinton disappeared, a court had ordered Leilani to begin paying child support to her own mother for Quinton's care. She had received an eviction notice and was now being told to pay for a child she wasn't legally entrusted with. Her emotional state was just as precarious. A few months prior, she recorded a disturbing 4-minute video while driving, apparently toward a river with the intention of ending her life. In a tearful, rambling message directed at Daniel, she lamented that he didn't love her, that all she wanted was his affection. She said goodbye to her 3 children, Zane, Sky, and Quinton, apologizing for not being able to be there for them.
Left right then. I got here about 3 o'clock yesterday.
And I got here about 3:30 in the morning.
It's been crazy. I mean, we don't know nothing. Whether it's the answers we want to hear or answers we don't want to hear, we just want to know something. My concern is him, and that's all it is. I mean, we concerned with his well-being.
I know everybody worked really hard yesterday, but
And
I want them to keep working hard.
And we appreciate everything that everybody has done, all the people that's come out and searched for him and all that. And he's always smiling. He's a happy kid. I mean, you get some kids but he always had a big smile on his face, and he was always happy.
Let me ask you, why are you getting emotional?
Because he's not here. He's just a baby, and I want him home. He's just a baby. Leilani's my daughter. She's 22. She hasn't always done the right things, and sometimes she does really great, and sometimes she doesn't. And I don't know what to think right now. I don't know what to believe, because I don't think anybody ever believes that this is going to happen to them. I don't know if I can trust her or if I don't.
I mean,
I just know I'm hurting, and I want this baby home.
We want answers, and we don't have answers.
Just thank you to everybody that's helped.
Thank you for everybody that's looked for him,
and please don't stop looking.
Yeah, like I said, we want answers. We want to find him. That's the answer we want, is somebody found him. You know, we're still hoping and praying, and we wish everybody to pray for him. Pray for us.
Yes.
The video was a raw, unsettling glimpse into a mind consumed by a need for love and validation, a mindset that seemed to prioritize her turbulent relationship over the well-being of her children. On the day Quinton went missing, Billie Jo Howell was out of town. The child she had been granted custody of to protect him from his mother's instability was, by a twist of fate, left solely in his mother's care. It was during this exact window of time that he disappeared. The report of a missing 20-month-old triggered a massive and immediate response. The Chatham County Police Department, alongside the FBI and K-9 units, descended on the Buckhalter Road neighborhood. They began with a thorough search of the Simon house, looking for the child or any clue that might explain his disappearance. They found stained beds and a stained pack and play, but no signs of a struggle or forced entry. Outside, they emptied the family's backyard swimming pool and searched a nearby pond. The area, a diverse mix of suburban homes, woods, and highways, was methodically canvassed and then recanvassed. Buckhalter Road and the surrounding streets were temporarily closed to traffic as the search grew more urgent with every passing minute. The community rallied, with many neighbors joining the frantic early search for the boy. Descriptions of Quinton: light brown hair, brown eyes, last seen in a light blue Sesame Street shirt and black pants, were broadcast to the public. investigators worked nearly 20-hour days, driven by the desperate hope of finding the toddler alive. Chief Jeff Hadley of the Chatham County Police held a press conference, stating that while everything was on the table, they had no evidence to suggest foul play or to believe Quinton was deceased. The prevailing public theories were that he had either been abducted, as his mother claimed, or had somehow wandered off. But as the days ticked by without a single trace of the boy, suspicion began to ferment within the community and, more quietly, among investigators. The focus started to shift towards the family itself. The public's perception of Leilani, in particular, soured dramatically just a few days into the search. While law enforcement and volunteers scoured the area around the clock, Leilani and her mother, Billie Jo Howell, were spotted at Stingrays, a popular bar on nearby Tybee Island. Witnesses reported that the women were part of a group that spent approximately 3 hours at the restaurant, taking shots and appearing loud and rambunctious. A photo of Leilani at the bar that night quickly surfaced on social media, igniting a firestorm of public outrage.
I've been here every day since this. I am not running and I'm not hiding. And if something does come up that I am at fault, I will take myself to that police station.
Chatham County Police have repeatedly said that though they've named Leilani the prime suspect in her son's disappearance and death, they don't believe she's a flight risk. Leilani says that she and her mother, Billie Howell, spend their days in the backyard of their home because it's too difficult to be inside with reminders of Quinton and the fact that he's gone.
Every day that goes by is less tears and more anger, not knowing what's happening, if that's even understandable. You wake up every day angry, hoping that you're going to get a phone call, and that phone call just doesn't come. We want him back in our arms, holding us. That's what we want. We're just hoping that he's in somebody's house and they're feeding him, and they are hoping that, maybe they wanted a baby or couldn't have a baby. Maybe they thought they were his savior. But it's not. That's their best hopes at this point.
The image of a mother, whose child was the subject of a desperate county-wide search, seemingly having a good time and drinking with friends, was damning. Protesters, furious at her apparent lack of concern, began to gather outside her home, demanding answers and accusing her of being involved in her son's disappearance. They wanted her arrested, even though authorities had not yet named a suspect. The search for Quinton was still officially a missing person case, but for many, it had already become a murder investigation with a prime suspect in plain sight. While the physical search for Quinton yielded nothing, the digital search into Leilani Simon's life was starting to paint a very different picture from the one she presented. Investigators meticulously analyzed her cell phone records and movements from the night of October 4th into the early hours of October 5th. Her story of a frantic mother waking to find her child gone began to unravel with every piece of data they uncovered. Leilani had told police that after a fight with Daniel, she'd left the house late at night to meet a friend named Misty at a nearby gas station to get some Orajel for a toothache. But her phone's location data told a different story. It showed that around 1 a.m., she hadn't gone to a gas station. Instead, she had driven roughly a mile away to the Azalea Mobile Home Park, a location she had failed to mention. Surveillance video from the area confirmed it. Her Dodge Journey was seen parked next to a row of commercial dumpsters. The footage showed her getting out of her vehicle and disposing of something in one of them. When confronted with this evidence, Leilani's story began to shift. Detectives spoke to her supposed friend, Misty, who told them she hadn't seen or heard from Leilani in months. The Orajel alibi was a lie. Cornered, Leilani tried to fit her story into the new facts. She admitted she hadn't met Misty, but insisted she was at the mobile home park for a different reason. She claimed she had gone to meet her drug dealer there, not to buy drugs, but simply to pay off an old debt. As for the dumpsters, she gave a bizarre explanation, claiming she was just throwing away normal household trash. But investigators were not buying it. Why would anyone drive to a secluded trailer park at 1 a.m. just to throw out garbage? The timing and location were too specific, too suspicious. Investigators believed she may have disposed of something related to the case. This discovery was the critical turning point. The evidence from her phone and the surveillance footage was the key that unlocked the direction of the investigation. This revelation also shed new light on a cryptic text message Quinton's babysitter had received at 5:29 a.m. that morning, just hours after Leilani's trip to the dumpsters. The message stated that her services would not be needed that day. It was an odd, last-minute cancellation. To detectives, it now seemed less like a simple change of plans and more like a calculated move by someone who knew the child she was supposed to watch would not be there. Leilani's narrative was crumbling, and with each lie exposed, the focus of the investigation narrowed directly and exclusively on her. On October 12, 2022, exactly 1 week after Quinton Simon was reported missing, the Chatham County Police Department made a grim and pivotal announcement. "We are saddened to report that CCPD and the FBI have notified Quinton Simon's family that we believe he is deceased," a public statement read. "We have named his mother, Leilani Simon, as the prime suspect in his disappearance and death." The news sent a shockwave through the community, extinguishing the flickering hope that Quinton might be found alive. Though no arrest had been made and no charges had yet been filed, the declaration was unequivocal. Leilani was, in the eyes of the law, the sole suspect. With this announcement, the nature of the search shifted dramatically. The frantic canvassing of woods, ponds, and neighborhoods ceased. All resources were redirected to a single, daunting location: the waste management landfill in Savannah County. Based on the evidence they had gathered, Leilani's trip to the dumpsters at the Azalea Mobile Home Park, investigators were convinced of a horrifying sequence of events. Investigators believed Leilani may have disposed of critical evidence related to her son's disappearance in that dumpster, and that the contents of that dumpster had been picked up by a garbage truck and transported to the landfill before anyone knew the child was even missing. The task ahead was monumental. The landfill was a vast mountain of refuse, and the search teams faced the grim prospect of sifting through thousands of tons of compacted garbage. The process was agonizingly slow and meticulous. They knew they were searching for the remains of a very small child, which could be easily missed. Excavators scooped massive loads of trash onto a designated search deck. There, law enforcement officers and sanitation workers painstakingly combed through the debris with rakes, spreading it into thin layers, examining every piece before clearing it to make way for the next load. This grueling work continued day after day, week after week. The physical and emotional toll on the search crews was immense. They moved an estimated 1.2 million pounds of trash, working under the constant, grim awareness of what they were looking for. For over a month, they found nothing. Yet, investigators held firm in their belief that Quinton was there. They refused to give up, driven by the need to recover the little boy and bring a final, tragic resolution to the search. While the crews toiled in the landfill, the public pressure on Leilani intensified. The community's grief and anger coalescing around the mother who was now officially the only person suspected of taking her son's life. On November 18, 2022, after 36 agonizing days of searching, the moment investigators had dreaded and worked tirelessly for finally came. After weeks of searching, investigators finally discovered human remains at the landfill, later confirmed to belong to Quinton. The remains were carefully collected and sent to the FBI's laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, for DNA analysis. The results came back quickly, confirming the search team's worst fears. They belonged to 20-month-old Quinton Simon. The discovery was devastating for everyone involved. Many of the rescue workers who had spent over a month meticulously sifting through trash were profoundly affected, with some later seeking counseling to cope with the trauma of what they had found. Just 3 days later, on November 21st, Leilani Simon was arrested. The woman who had publicly professed her innocence, even telling a local news station she would turn herself in if any evidence proved she was at fault, was taken into custody. She was charged with malice murder, felony murder, concealing the death of another, and making false statements. The search was over, and the case had now officially transitioned from a missing person investigation to a homicide prosecution. With Leilani behind bars, prosecutors began to build their case for trial. They faced a significant challenge. Due to the condition of the remains after being in the landfill for weeks, medical examiners were unable to determine an exact cause of death. They didn't have a murder weapon, a confession, or a direct witness to the crime. Instead, they had a powerful collection of damning circumstances. They had Leilani's web of lies, the fabricated Origel story, the shifting alibis. They had the cell phone and surveillance data that placed her at the dumpsters at 1 a.m. They had the text to the babysitter canceling her services. And they had what they believed was a motive, rooted in Leilani's emotional instability and her desperate need for her boyfriend's attention. The defense, in turn, focused on the lack of direct evidence. They argued that prosecutors couldn't prove a murder had even occurred. It could have been an accident, perhaps a tragic result of the child getting into drugs that were present in the home. They pointed the finger squarely at Daniel Youngkin, highlighting that he was the other adult in the house and that he, too, had changed his story, initially claiming to have seen Quinton that morning before recanting. He was, the defense contended, the embodiment of reasonable doubt. The trial of Leilani Simon began almost 2 years to the day after Quinton's death. Prosecutors laid out their case, painting a portrait of a narcissistic and neglectful mother who saw her own son as an obstacle. The prosecution argued that Leilani treated her son with disregard, acting out of emotional instability and despair. Key testimony came from a 17-year-old babysitter who described a pattern of disturbing behavior.
There was a difference in the love she showed between Zane and Quinton, and I felt bad, and I would work, and my daughter would say, "Can we just get him, Mom, because this happened today?" And I would say, "Yeah, call her and ask her if he can stay."
Can you think of some examples of how the defendant treated the boys differently?
Well, she was working at Bojangles, and she had brought food home, and she fed Quinton loved food, and every time he seen a bag, he would want it. He's little. She would feed Zane before she fed Quinton, every time. And I just thought that was strange.
So do you mean she'd give Zane food and make Quinton wait?
Yes, ma'am,
I mean,
absolutely.
she wasn't physically feeding Zane.
No, she would give him the food.
Just give him food.
And he would eat, and then Quinton would be, whining and wanting it, and she would give it to him eventually.
Did you ever say anything to her about that?
I did not.
Are there any other ways that she treated the boys differently that you noticed?
Just by the way she talked to him, when she would, once in a while that she did come and pick them up, she would, grab Zane and he would hug her because he was close to her. I mean, you could definitely tell it. And then, Quinton, 99% of the time, wanted to stay with us, and he would start crying. Now, if Danny come and picked him up, it was different.
Okay. How did Quinton act if Danny came?
He would go with Danny. He wouldn't cry to stay with us. He loved Danny. He would, Danny would pick him up and he'd hug him.
Okay. All right. Did Leilani ever talk to you about how she felt about the boys?
Yes, ma'am. She just, one time, and my daughter had more talks with her than I did. I didn't really talk to her that much. But she just said that she loved Quinton more. Zane more than Quinton. And, I didn't question it. She's a crappy mom. I knew that. But I just never said anything to her. I would always call Billy Joe when I seen things that was going on.
Okay. Did she ever, in that conversation, did she explain more about, like, Zane had been through things with her?
Yes,
or anything
that
like
Zane had been her ride or die his whole life. And she did not like Quinton's father.
She told the jury that Leilani treated Quinton differently from her other 2 children, often behaving harshly toward him. One witness described moments of harsh treatment, including an incident where Quinton was left unattended and suffered a fall. The babysitter, a child herself at the time, admitted she never reported the abuse. Another neighbor testified that she always thought Leilani was a lousy mother who seemed more focused on herself than her kids. The prosecution presented the digital note, the tearful video Leilani had recorded months earlier threatening to drive into a river. They argued this video demonstrated her obsessive and unhealthy state of mind, a mindset that prioritized her romantic turmoil over her children's safety. The state contended that nothing had changed in her emotional state between the recording of that video and the night Quinton died. The defense fired back, hammering on the lack of physical evidence. There was no murder weapon. There was no cause of death, her attorney argued. You don't get to assume someone into a murder conviction. They portrayed the state's case as nothing more than rumor, gossip, speculation, and innuendo. They insisted that an accidental death, possibly from a drug overdose, was a plausible alternative that the state couldn't disprove. The defense strategy centered on creating reasonable doubt by pointing to Daniel Youngkin. They reminded the jury that Daniel had initially lied to police, claiming he saw Quinton at 6 a.m. on the morning he vanished. He later admitted this was false, stating he hadn't actually checked the playpen. Why did he lie?
At some point, did y'all get the kids ready for bed and put them down? Or one or both of you?
Yes, sir. I believe so.
Now, from this point forward, did you leave the house again that night at any point?
No.
And did the defendant?
Yes, sir.
What is the first trip that you remember her taking?
To 204.
Did the two of y'all talk about that? She say anything to you before she left?
Yeah, she told me she was doing that.
Do you remember what led up to her leaving? Anything about that?
No.
That's fine.
Really.
And what were you doing at the time that she left for 204?
Laying in bed.
What were the children doing?
Laying down as well.
Where were each of the three children in the house?
Zane was on his race car bed. Sky was on the couch, or in her swing, and Quinton was in his playpen.
At the time that the defendant left for 204, was Quinton okay?
Yeah.
Did anything at all out of the ordinary happen to that point?
No.
And what happened, what was going on while she was gone on that trip to 204?
I think I fell asleep.
Now, do you remember the defendant getting home from the 204 trip?
No.
And why is that?
I was asleep.
What's the next memory you have of that night or morning?
Waking up, and she was beside me, and that was that.
At the time that you went to sleep, was Quinton okay?
Yeah.
Had anything at all happened at that point?
Not to my knowledge.
And let's talk about the night. Do you remember seeing or hearing anything during the night?
No, I don't.
So let's go to you waking up. Did you wake up naturally, or did you wake up in response to an alarm, or what?
Yeah, I think my alarm on my phone went off.
And where did you have your phone that night?
Maybe it was under my pillow. I don't know.
Why would it have been under your pillow?
She had a tendency of going through my things.
What do you mean?
She would, without my knowledge, take my devices and go through them, and I felt it was invasive.
Why was she doing that?
She had this idea that I was wronging her.
How were things between the two of you at this time?
There wasn't much there. I was there for Sky.
So, you think you had an alarm set and your phone might have been under your pillow? Is that kind of where we left off?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you get up, what do you do?
Normally try and be quiet so I don't wake any of the kids up. And I tried to wake her up, but she was... Normally if I do that, I'd either get yelled at or something like that. So I said, hey, are you going to work today? She'd be like, no. And that's when I proceeded to text Michelle and say that she was going to watch the kids, as in this exhibit here, it says, hey, the kids are going to stay here with her today, Miss Michelle.
And what time was that text sent?
5:20 a.m.
A moment ago, you were talking about what would happen in the morning when you get up for work and you try to wake her up, and you said she would be like.
Oh yeah, she'd yell at me or, yeah, pretty much I get yelled at.
By the phrasing, she would be like yelling at you. Can I take from that this is something that this was not the first time this had happened?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you tell us about that? There's a history of this?
It's a pretty general thing at that time.
Tell me what you mean.
I would try and wake her up to go to work, and she would either yell at me for waking her up or say she's not going in, and she would make up the time and go in with Paul on his shift. It'd be a rare occasion for me not to get yelled at or that to happen.
Why was it during that time frame that you were able to get up and go to work as scheduled, and she would have these difficulties with that? What was going on?
I'm sorry, could you?
Why was it that you were able to get up to go to work and she was having these difficulties getting up, going to work during this time period? What was going on there?
Oh, I would go to sleep and she wouldn't be there, so I just was kind of making sure that I could get a paycheck at that point, so I just kind of let her be her own person, of course. Well, not let her, but you know, she would do whatever she did, and I would make sure that the kids were taken care of and that I'd make it to work, at least somewhat on time.
So there are times you go to sleep at night so that you're able to get up for work and she's not there.
There were times like that, yeah.
And would she talk to you about where she had been?
I never asked.
Now, let's go back to that text message to Michelle. Were you, before you sent that text message to Michelle, had you been planning on taking the 3 children to Michelle's house that morning?
Yeah, the plan was because we missed the day before work for her tooth removal, and we both were scheduled for the next day for a shift. The plan was to drop the kids off and go to work with her.
Furthermore, Daniel left Savannah the day after participating in an FBI-bugged hotel room sting with Leilani and never returned. The defense argued that Leilani's steadfast adherence to the Origel story, even when it was clearly false, could be explained if Daniel had invented it and coached her to stick to it. Leilani, they suggested, might have been covering for him. The jury was left to weigh a mountain of circumstantial evidence against the stark absence of a definitive cause of death. They had to decide if Leilani's constant lying and suspicious behavior were proof of a calculated killer, or the panicked actions of a high, neglectful mother caught in a tragic accident she couldn't explain. After deliberating for 6 hours, they reached a decision. The jury foreman handed the verdict to the bailiff. Leilani Simon, who had remained stoic and largely emotionless throughout the trial, stood to hear her fate. On the charge of malice murder, the foreman read the verdict: guilty. The word was repeated for each of the 18 other counts she faced, from felony murder to concealing a death and making false statements. She was found guilty on all of them. Judge Tammy Stokes sentenced Leilani to life in prison. However, she granted her the possibility of parole, a decision that signaled the judge may have shared some of the questions about the absolute certainty of murder versus a lesser offense. With an additional 10 years tacked on for other charges, Leilani Simon would have to serve a minimum of 40 years before she could even be considered for release. In the aftermath, the broken pieces of the family were scattered. Shortly after Leilani's conviction, her mother, Billie Jo Howell, applied for custody of Quinton's 2 surviving siblings. This move was met with public outcry, as many believed Billie Jo shared a portion of the blame. She had been granted custody to protect Quinton, but had left him in the care of the very person the state deemed unfit, a decision that proved fatal. The children were ultimately placed in foster care, removed from the cycle of neglect that had defined their early lives. To this day, Leilani Simon maintains her innocence from behind bars, writing letters to news stations claiming she was wrongly convicted on a case built without solid evidence. She has already motioned for a new trial. The story of Quinton Simon is a tragic testament to the fragility of innocence and the devastating consequences of systemic failure. He was a child known to be at risk, living in a volatile home with a mother who was emotionally unstable and battling addiction. He was given a legal guardian who, by her own admission, had failed her own daughter and who was absent when he needed her most. Quinton, a sweet boy who loved to give fist bumps he called booms, was failed by the very people who should have been his protectors. His death was not just the result of a single monstrous act, but the culmination of a long history of neglect, dysfunction, and darkness that lurked where a child should have only ever found safety and love.